Okay, so no one's turned up, but I'm just going to record it for you guys anyway. So we are currently on the food production topic. I know we briefly went through ecology. We'll come back to that, although you have done it in year 9. Um, so we'll just move on to topics you haven't really covered to ensure that you've covered everything on time. So I know in January we briefly went through this. So our objectives for the first part of the food production topic is about crop plants. We're going to describe how glass houses and polythene tunnels are used to increase the yield of certain crops. We're going to understand how the effects of crop yield of increased carbon dioxide and increased temperature in glass houses. Understand how the use of fertilizer can increase crop yield. Understand the reasons for pest control and the advantages and disadvantages of using pesticides and biological control with crop plants. And we'll come on to these learning objectives later. Now, human population. Obviously, in the last 100 years, there's been an explosion of human population. It's had a huge impact on the environment. Obviously, as you can see from the graph, there's a huge exponential growth within the last 100 years. 10,000 BC means before Christ, before Jesus, or Isa alayhi salam. That is the... No, not yes. Right, guys, some technical difficulties, so I wasn't sharing the PowerPoint, so we'll just go back to show you. Right, so the objectives, again, the 5.1 to 5.4, about glass houses, the effects on crop yield with all these different factors in the glass house, fertilizers, how we can use them to increase the crop yield, and understand the reasons for pest control and the advantages and disadvantages of using pesticides and biological controls. We'll come on to microorganisms and fish farming later. So as I was saying, there was a explosion in the human population in recent times. This has had a significant effect on the world. There's been a shortage of food in some countries. More land is being used for building and farming. More population, while the population is increasing, the world's resources are therefore running out. And it's not sustainable. What does sustainable mean? Well, we can't keep going on like this for the long term. Moving on. We're going to have a look at biological resources. We're also going to look at farming techniques, the role of microorganisms within fish farming. Right, the first part, so crops are clearly key to feeding when the population is increasing. So we need to make sure that the growing process is an efficient process, so we get the highest yield possible. Now, highest yield means the amount. So we want to get the highest amount. Now, there are some key areas we're going to look at. We're going to create the ideal conditions for photosynthesis, because obviously we're growing crops, i.e. vegetables. Using fertilizers, we'll come on to that, and controlling pests, and we'll also come on to that. So now, maximizing photosynthesis, let's talk about the conditions. So the best way, sorry, spelling mistake there, the best way to control the conditions or to maximize photosynthesis is to grow crops in something called a polytunnel or greenhouse. I know when we discussed this before, some of you said you had farms, I think, or you've seen it in the farm in this country. So these are called polytunnels or greenhouses that the conditions are kept in a controlled fashion. So we can actually control the conditions to maximize the yield. We want to make sure we get the most yield, the most amount of our crops for efficiency and cost purposes. So all the factors for photosynthesis that we already know can be manipulated and controlled. So we're going to look at the following factors that we should know from before: light, temperature, carbon dioxide, and the supply of water. And if you know the equation for photosynthesis, you'll know how these factors can affect photosynthesis. As you can see, here's a picture of an example of a greenhouse. So first of all, light, we can control the amount of light as opposed to wild plant life, where it's dependent upon the daytime or the sun. So we can actually artificially, let me just check the mic is on. Yep, the mic's on. Right, we can actually artificially control the light, the amount of light the plants get. And we know this is important for photosynthesis. So the transparent material, as you can see on the roof, allows light in for photosynthesis. Additional lighting can be added in the winter months where there's not enough light, because obviously we have shorter days. Now, moving on. So temperature, you need to think how temperature can affect photosynthesis. You know, photosynthesis is a chemical reaction. So you need to think about how you can affect a chemical reaction using temperature. And especially if you've done chemistry, you definitely know this. Or if you remember enzymes from year 10, you'll 100% know about this. So if we increase the temperature using heaters in our greenhouse, we can make sure it's optimum, and you should remember what that means, the best temperature for the enzymes to work. So obviously photosynthesis is a chemical reaction. Chemical reactions are controlled by enzymes, or it can be sped up by enzymes, as long as there are optimum conditions. So due to the greenhouse effect, however, the glass houses and polytunnels are at temperatures, and you should remember what greenhouse gases are in pollution, and there's a little diagram just reminding you about the greenhouse effect. Okay, so crop plants, again, another factor, CO2. So when we burn fuels, we can increase the temperature and they release carbon dioxide as a waste product. So we can actually harness this. This CO2 is used by plants, as you know from the photosynthesis reaction, which I keep referring to. It also increases water vapor levels in the air. This, if you remember, going back to transpiration, this means that the less water is lost by the plant in transpiration. Why? You have to think about diffusion here. Higher concentration, lower concentration. There's more water vapor within the air, so there's less transpiration, which means a loss of water from the leaves. If you know diffusion, you'd work that one out if you think about higher concentrations or lower concentration of water molecules. Okay, so now H2O, amount of water. So we can actually control the amount of water supplied to the plants as opposed to wild plants where it's dependent upon rain or human interference. We can also make sure the humidity of the air is not too high, because humidity, which means the amount of water vapor in air, could actually breed fungi or bacteria, which could be detrimental to the plants. Right, so if you think about the weather now, greenhouses also protect plants from wind and frost, which could be detrimental to the process of photosynthesis if you think about the temperature. Now, fertilizers. What are fertilizers? Let's have a look. So we've learned that plants die or get eaten by animals and they die themselves. If you remember the cycles, that we'll come back to later on. Bacteria and fungi decompose. You need to make sure you know what that means. You should know by now, year 11s. They decompose them and return all the minerals to that environment where they can be reused. However, when farmers harvest the crops and animals, they remove these minerals from the environment. What does harvest mean? That means take them out of the ground, and that's why the farmers remove these minerals. This becomes an issue when you want to grow in the area again, as the soil is now deficient in those minerals. Deficient, you need to know what that means. And it's not the opposite of efficient. Deficient means not enough. Now, therefore, farmers replace these missing minerals with something called fertilizers to again improve crop yield. Farmers do things for a reason, to ensure that crop yield is maximized. Yeah, it's muted. Do I need to do something?
If I was to record for my voice as well, where do I start?
What do you mean, record?
I want to record, yes.
Ah, okay.
So for this group.
Right, you go and post.
Okay.
Did you want to save that assignment?
Yeah. So I want to record something new for something.
Record a lesson?
Yes.
Okay, so what you need to do. You don't want to record your face, do you?
No, where did you get this one from?
Just.
Oh, okay, the video,
Meet
okay.
Now.
Then I turn
that off.
Then okay.
Meet now. And you can share whatever screen you want.
So I've got the page on in their book, their textbook opened.
Well, some people have come in. Guys, just come out. It's not a lesson right now.
No, I have them.
Oh, you have them now? Okay, just stay here. Just stay here for a minute. Where is it? It's not on here.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one.
Oh, okay.
So if I could get them to see this one.
Hello, Mister, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Just wait 1 minute, please.
Okay.
Screen one. Not screen one. Can everyone see the textbook on their screens?
Yes.
Yes, you can see it? Okay.
Okay.
And to record.
Sir, we need to bring the books and the textbook.
Yes, bring everything, please. To record, start recording. It's recording.
Go back to the textbook.
This is recording screen one. I don't know why. This is why. No, only record this, and you can move along. You can move here. It's not recording this anymore. It's only recording this. Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone, just turn to page 150 in your textbooks. There you go. So it's recording now. Unmuted. Sorry, some technical difficulties there. So as we were saying, we need to replace these missing minerals with fertilizers to improve crop yield. There are two types of fertilizers, organic and inorganic. And if you've ever been to a supermarket, you may have seen things labeled as organic and others labeled as inorganic. I want you to have a quick Google search if you can, and have a look if you can tell the difference between organic and inorganic. Okay, well, hopefully you found the answer to that. And you can tell by the pictures as well. So let's move on. So we'll start with organic. So organic fertilizers are made from manure. Ahmed Jassim's favorite word, because he uses that in exam questions, even though the question has nothing to do with manure. So lesson should have started at 10:20. Okay. Right, moving on then. So organic fertilizers made of manure and mixed with straw. That means they're natural. They are not very efficient because you can't actually control the amount of minerals within them. But because they're natural, they're not really bad for the environment. Now, inorganic fertilizers, they're actually formulated within the labs, and you can put all these different minerals, potassium, phosphorus, nitrate, and ammonia, and you can actually control the amount you put in. You can buy them in bulk. What does bulk mean? Buy loads of them at the same time and evenly spread them across your crop. However, there are downsides, namely eutrophication, which you should know. These minerals leak into the rivers, and if you haven't already covered it, this is a problem for the environment of the ecosystem of the river. We'll come back to that at a later date. Now, pest control. What is a pest? What is a pest? Something that reduces the yield of crop or livestock. So it can actually harm or reduce the yield of your crops. And pests can actually be plants. So something called weed. You may see them in your the front of your house or in your garden. By the side they grow. Animals come and eat your crops. Bacteria, viruses, or fungi all damage the amount of your crops. So using chemical pesticides, something that kills the pest. It's the most common way to kill the pests. They're sprayed on crops, as you can see from the picture, regularly, and they are very toxic to the pests, and they work quickly, so they kill them. However, there are definitely issues using this type of pesticide. Namely, pests can become resistant to them, so it doesn't work anymore. You have to reapply it regularly, so you have to apply it all the time. It can also damage other wildlife other than the pest, so it's not also toxic to the pest, it's toxic to all the other organisms living in that environment. They can also be washed away into rivers and streams, harming other organisms in the water. For example, fish can be toxic to fish if they're washed into rivers. Biological control, that's another form of pest control. So organic farmers cannot use pesticides because they're organic. Means it's all natural. They don't want to use any chemicals. So they may opt for biological control. So they'll choose biological controls. What are biological controls? It's when another living organism is introduced to control the pest rather than a chemical. So another organism comes in and eats the pest. This may involve a natural predator, for example, ladybirds killing green flies. It may be a herbivore to destroy a weed, so something that only eats that type of weed. A parasite or sterile males, so that when they mate, the females have no more offspring. So eventually the pests die out. Sterile means they cannot reproduce. Okay, so here are some advantages and disadvantages that you definitely should learn, because they normally give these type of questions. I believe this is a paper 2 topic. So pesticides, they kill all pests, they're quite cheap and they're easy to apply. So these, we're talking about the chemical ones. However, the disadvantages, they can get into the food chain, poison other organisms, they can evolve and become resistant. They need to be reapplied regularly. Biological control doesn't involve chemicals, so they're organic. They only need to be applied once. They're specific to killing the pest, so it doesn't kill everything. So only that pest that the insect or biological control eats, it will remove. It doesn't wipe out the pest, it just controls it, however, which is a bad thing. It doesn't completely eat it or wipe it off. It may also affect other organisms in the food web, introducing another organism within that environment, and it can be a very slow process. Okay, so we've gone through how glasshouses and polythene tunnels can be used to increase the crop yield of certain crops. We can understand the effects on crop yield of increased carbon dioxide and increased temperature in glasshouses, the factors of photosynthesis, and we can understand how the use of fertilizers can increase crop yield. We've also just now understood the reasons for pest control and the advantages and disadvantages of pesticides and biological control with crop plants. Okay, so that's microorganisms. So now what I want to do is, just give me a minute. I want to show you a video. It's awfully slow. I want to record stuff. It's making funny noises. Okay, that's not responding. That's great. Okay, so let's put a video up. So if we just revise the factors that affect photosynthesis. So this is the important thing. So we've learned or revised the factors of photosynthesis, and now this is very relevant to our lesson today. The conditions required for farmers to make sure their crop yield is maximized. So have a listen.